Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. I'm also the host for the podcast, so I get to do lots of fun things. A little bit about the Alliance, if you're not familiar with who we are and what we do. The Alliance was formed, I guess we're going on about 5.5 years ago. Really, the organization began out of a personal experience I had with my own family. Where my son was being restrained and secluded and traumatized, but that led to a lot of research and ultimately led me to form a small nonprofit that was really focused on how we could influence positive change, how we could move people away from things like restraint and seclusion and a lot of the punitive and exclusionary things that are done to kids very often in the name of behavior. So a lot of our work is really focused on reducing, eliminating practices, restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, trying to improve outcomes for kids. And we do a lot of work not only in the areas of trying to get better laws and policies passed, but trying to influence positive changes in terms of schools and other systems of care and move people into better directions. So I'm excited to be with you here today. We've got a great guest with us here today, which I am always excited to do. We've got Maria Sanders joining us, who we'll be introducing here in just a moment. But before we get there, a couple of announcements. First of all, as many of you know, these programs are recorded. So when we do these live, they are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and hopefully you're on one of those watching us now. However, if you're not able to watch the whole program or you just like to watch it later, you can actually come back and watch it on any of those platforms later. So it is recorded and still available after the fact on YouTube, LinkedIn, and on Facebook. We also will make it available as an audio-only podcast. So if you like to listen on the go, you can go to Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you happen to get your podcast, and you can download it and listen to it there as well. Do want to mention that we have a couple of sponsors that have been with us throughout 2024 who have helped us to bring the podcast to you and to do the podcast. And we're getting towards the end of the year here. And actually, we're going to be looking for some additional sponsors here as we move into 2025. But I wanted to mention two of our 2024 sponsors who have very generously helped support this work that we're doing. The first is, and this is a father and son, Robert and Ryan Delana. Robert and Ryan Delana wrote a book together, a book called Without Restraint. And unfortunately, it is based on a story that is all too common to many of us, a story where a child is being physically restrained, secluded, and traumatized by things being done to them, often in the name of support and care. This was a story that happened with Ryan Delana, and his father and his mother began to ask questions, began to challenge the ideas that people were proposing. And at one point, there was even kind of this idea that they should move him out into some kind of outside placement. And they began asking a lot of questions. Ultimately, Robert one day took Ryan skiing and suddenly began to see a different child emerge. And Ryan is now a skier who does some amazing work and has a YouTube channel and is in college and probably getting close to graduating soon. But again, it's a story that a lot of folks might be able to relate to. But there's some positive parts of this where you kind of learn what the family did to navigate and how ultimately it really led to seeing a different child and some success. So that is one of our sponsors. The other sponsor that we've had over the course of this year has been Supportable Solutions. Supportable Solutions is the company behind the Why Toolkit, which many of you may have heard of before if you watch the program. And the Why Toolkit is really something developed to understand the deeper why of why children might be having a hard time. Connie Persick, who is the founder and the owner of Supportable Solutions, when we first met, she started talking about the Why Toolkit and talked about it kind of in the context of a different take on kind of a functional behavioral assessment. Really the kind of take that there should be, which is really trying to understand the deeper why of what's going on underneath behavior. And let me share with you just a brief clip here about the toolkit.
Behaviors are signals to the deeper whys. The Why Toolkit, a tool built for and approved by teachers, parents, and administrators that can both assess and support individuals struggling with behaviors. Connie has created a document that turns typical behavioral documents upside down and replaces them with a deep dive into what really matters: how to support each child within a compassionate and relational framework based on their individual differences. The Y Toolkit was found to decrease seclusion and restraint by 21% in a year-long pilot study.
And I want to thank Connie and Supportable Solutions for being a sponsor. Been a sponsor all year long, and really appreciate that support. But the Y Toolkit really is a fantastic approach, and one that I recommend you check out. Regardless of whether you're a parent or an educator, it's worth looking into. We find that there's a lot of parents that actually go, they check it out. You can get a single subscription. It's very, very affordable, and kind of see what it's all about. And we've had parents then go recommend that to their schools, and it's been really helpful. I do want to share one last announcement with you, and that is something that I've been talking about for a while now. We have a fantastic event coming up here in the new year. We've got a virtual conference, which is scheduled for January. It's called Supporting All Brains, and it is really looking at how neuroscience and neurodiversity affirming approaches can help us to better support students, teachers, and staff. I'm really looking forward to this. We have the event. It's planned for January 20th. One of the things I'll point out here, this is going to be an all-day event, and there's actually even content that goes beyond the day. But one of the things I wanted to do was make sure that the tickets were very affordable as well. They're only $29 for a ticket for the event, and that runs on the 20th from 8:30 to 5:30. But here's the good news. While that is Eastern Standard Time here in the US, one of the things that we'll be doing is it will all be recorded, and it will be available on our learning management system after the event. So if you get a ticket and you're in New Zealand and it's in the middle of the night and you can't watch the whole thing, you'll actually be able to go back and watch any part of it you're not able to watch live, and we'll make sure you have access to that as well. We've actually had a number of schools and school districts that have expressed interest and bought blocks of tickets, and that's a great thing to see. As well as kind of with plans to continue to share these sessions throughout their school year. I've got a lot of amazing speakers. Of course, we've got Dr. Lori Desautel, who will be there talking about applied educational neuroscience. We've got occupational therapists. We have self-advocates and disabled activists. We have therapists, special educators, speech language pathologists, really a fantastic group of people and topics. And since the tickets went on sale, we've actually even added more content. We can't make more hours into the day, but one of the things we decided to do was add bonus sessions. So when you watch the event live, you're actually going to have 4 more sessions available to you on the online learning platform. So there'll be more content that you don't get to watch live because we can't make the day too long. But we just kept having ideas of things to add. Do want to mention we've got some fantastic sponsors for the event who have helped to support us bringing this event to you. We also have a lot of amazing door prizes as well. We've got a number of individuals who have donated door prizes. We've got a lot of signed books. Here happens to be one from Mona Della Hook. We've got books from Lori Desautel and Joe Brummer, subscription to the Y Toolkit, lots of great things. So if you haven't checked that out already, I would encourage you to do so. It's a fantastic event. We're really looking forward to it and hoping to do more things like this in the new year as well. I think it's going to be a great way to continue to do the work we're trying to do, which is not only saying, hey, don't do these things that can be wrong and harmful, but really trying to help people find better things that they can and should do that ultimately, in my experience, not only benefit our kids, but benefit teachers, staff, and others when we're moving in different directions. So with that, I'm going to introduce our guest here in a moment. But before I do, I just want to ask you, and you probably know what I'm going to ask you because I do this every time. If you are watching live, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. It's always a lot of fun to see where people are joining us from. I always like sharing with the guests as well, and it's fun to see people jump on from all over the world. So, please take a moment and in the chat, just let us know who you are and where you're from. And with that, let's go ahead and get to our guest here. This is why you are here, and I'm excited to have Maria here with us. Maria Sanders is a licensed social worker, and as many of you know, this is not the first time I've said this. Social workers are some of my favorite people in the world. Social workers all seem to, at least the ones I've been lucky enough to meet, all seem to be doing all of this work for so many of the right reasons and really sincere people. So Maria is a licensed social worker, PCI certified parent coach, is certified in collaborative problem solving. And many of you may have heard of that approach before through Think Kids, a program based at the Department of Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital. Her work is supported by conscious parenting and collaborative problem solving. She works with parents struggling with any parenting challenge, from getting a child to sleep, addressing parent-teen conflict, and probably many, many things in between. And of course, I know you're there and available to work with schools as well. Maria works one-on-one with parents virtually or in her Montclair, New Jersey office, offers programs to schools, public and independent, pediatricians' offices, professional organizations, and corporate meetings. Maria started her professional career as a school social worker, doing work for the child study team and running social skills groups. Additionally, she has over 15 years of experience as an early intervention specialist, serving as a teacher and social worker. So you are not new to any of this. These years fly by really quickly. But welcome and thank you for joining us here today. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you. This is a real gift. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. And speaking of time flying, we were talking a little bit before the show started, and we've now booked the podcast out fairly well in advance, and it was about a year ago that we were having conversations about, hey, we've got to have you on the podcast. So really excited to have you here and have you sharing about the work that you're doing and sharing some of your experience. So we're really excited. So let's go ahead and kick off. Of course, I read through your bio, and your bio, tells us a certain amount about you. But there's a lot more of you that I'd like to, talk about and hear about. So I wonder if you might talk to us a little bit, and just going back, a little over those 15 years ago. But what led you down the road of becoming a social worker and having an interest in working with kids and families?
That's a good question. I sort of didn't expect it. Only because sometimes people are like, oh, how did you get into collaborative problem solving or parent coaching? But in general, social work, I think that was just always something I did. As a kid, I did volunteer work. And actually, I went to a boarding school, a Quaker boarding school in Pennsylvania, and we had to do community service. And back then, I worked at a school, I think it was called Eastern State School and Hospital. And it was a school for kids with challenging behavior. And I didn't make that connection until like a couple of years ago. I went back to my high school for a reunion or something like that. And I remembered, and I was like, well, I'm where I'm supposed to be. And I think it was just always part of who I was, because I went to college, got my master's. I've never veered off this track of being here to support people.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think about my own life and where I am and where I thought I was going, and I've had some twists and turns along the way. In the very early days of college, my major was TV, radio, film, and of course that dates me a little bit as well. But somehow then went into biology and had degrees in marine biology, environmental science, and of course now am doing work that is quite different from what I had ever planned. But sometimes life kind of throws things at you that change your course and direction. So you go into social work, you begin kind of having an interest in supporting kids and kids that, as you mentioned, are sometimes in situations where they're having difficulty meeting the expectations that are being placed on them. Tell us a little bit about collaborative problem solving. I think that there are probably people that are watching this that are familiar with, the CPS approach, but there probably are some that are not as well. So would you tell us a little bit about how you came across collaborative problem solving and really at a high level what it is?
Yeah. So how I came across it was my oldest daughter, who's now in 8th grade. She was in kindergarten at the time, and her school had implemented something called Class Dojo. And I don't know if you're familiar with it. I wasn't really familiar with it at the time, but I got the notification about it, looked into it, and I was like, something doesn't feel right about this. And I looked into it more, and it really, really just didn't sit well with me. What I didn't like was there were many things actually, but one of the things was that it was this public display of how well or how poorly a student was doing in front of their entire class. That was part of it. I didn't love that parents were like able to constantly be checking how their child was doing, because I feel like we need to give teachers space and respect that they're doing their job, and we don't need to, hover. But the biggest thing was that feeling for a child of like, oh, I'm doing well, I'm not doing well. And that kind of point level system of like going up and down the scales. And I have a child who is well behaved in schools. I was definitely looking at the entire picture of the spectrum of students that are in a classroom, having worked in schools. And at the time that she was in kindergarten, I wasn't working in schools, but I was like, this is not okay. I brought up some research from Alfie Kahn about rewards and punishments and shared that with the teacher, shared that with the principal. And the principal was open to removing the program and said, his biggest question was, if we have some teachers that really struggle with classroom behavior management, if I take this away, I need to be able to give them something. What do you suggest? And he knew my background as a school social worker. And I honestly was like, I don't know. Let me look into this. And I found out about collaborative problem solving. I, Googled whatever. And then the director of Think Kids, Stuart Ablon, was in New York City. I'm right outside of New York, doing an intro day. And I went and I was just like, whoa. There were times I was like, is this just another gimmick? Is this just another one-off, like whatever? And so I kind of sat there, not very open-minded at times. And the more he shared, I was like, okay, this aligns with the work I do and my belief as a human, as a parent, as a social worker, as everything. And that was it. I wanted to learn more and more about it, and got certified through all their levels of training. And now I'm a certified trainer in collaborative problem solving. And so what we call CPS, and I like to make sure people know that when I'm referring to CPS, it's collaborative problem solving, not child protection services.
Right.
So CPS is a research-based approach in the neurobiology, in the neurosciences. So what that means, it's an approach to working with kids with challenging behavior. And challenging behavior really means many different things. It could be an explosive child with very outward behaviors, and it could mean that child who's just quiet, who has shifted their behavior. They used to be outgoing and social, and now they're not talking, and you're not finding a way to get through to them. That's still challenging, right? As an adult, whether you're a parent, a caregiver, an educator, you want to connect with that child. And that's still challenging when you're like, I'm trying to ask them what's going on and they're not giving me any feedback. That's a struggle. Or the child who's a perfectionist or whatever. So we're looking at challenging behavior through the lens, sort of like a learning disability. If a child was struggling with reading, we wouldn't punish them or give them consequences because they can't read. And we also wouldn't reward them or, bribe them to figure out how to read. We would say, oh, there's some underlying skill challenge here. Decoding, fluency, comprehension, that's what's going on. So therefore, we need to work on building those skills so that they can read at grade level. That's sort of how we're looking at challenging behavior through that lens, that challenging behaviors coming from some what we call lagging skills, things like flexibility, frustration tolerance, problem solving, and a whole host of other skills. And that it's those skills that kids are struggling with, and that's why we're seeing these challenging behaviors. So our focus as the parent, the caregiver, the educator, and what I do in my work is teaching how to help build those skills. And the way we build those skills is through this relational approach of collaborative problem solving.
You said a few things on your way there that we're kind of putting bookmarks in my head. One of them talking about Class Dojo, which of course is probably used in many schools still across the country. And there's a lot of similar ideology and programs out there that are very based on reward and consequence models, that are very based in kind of traditional classical behaviorism and operant conditioning and rewards, all of these things. I think back to the clip charts, the clip up, clip down. And I remember, I remember those being in my daughter's classroom a number of years ago. Fortunately, I don't think they are anymore. But nonetheless, I mean, they're still being used in a lot of schools around the country. And you brought up Avi Cohen's work, who I'm a big fan of Avi's work. And of course, the book Punished by Rewards is a fantastic book, and really dives into all of the research, because we kind of shifted at one point where people began to realize a lot of the punitive and kind of negative consequences were not helping kids that needed help, and people shifted into this idea of, oh well, we'll do positive things, we'll do rewards, and I think what gets missed there is that many of these well-intended approaches aren't helping kids that need help the most, aren't helping kids that are kids with disabilities, neurodivergent kids, kids with a trauma background. A lot of these approaches, in fact, if anything, lead to more escalated kids and more more behaviors in many cases. So I thought it was interesting you mentioning that, because unfortunately, although I mean you had that moment years ago, I had that moment years ago. I'm sure that many of our listeners have probably been through that as well. A lot of these approaches are still really, really prevalent in schools, and people are still looking for what to do instead. I was thinking about your, story about how you, kind of found collaborative problem solving, and I have a parallel story, and that was, kind of related to when I began this work around restraint seclusion, and very early on. Was talking about the harm that was being caused by, these approaches, and talking about the need to move in different directions. And of course, the question would be, well, what do we do instead? And I think there was one time early on that somebody asked me that question that I didn't have a good answer. That's not where I've been focused. I've been focusing on, look, this is happening to certain kids. It's causing a lot of harm. And I took that moment as kind of that challenge of, I'll be back, and began doing a lot of research, and I found a lot of different work out there, and discovered the work of people like Mona Delahooke and Laurie Desautel, and at the same time had found Lost in School by Ross Greene, and ultimately began to advocate for some of these approaches that are out there that I think are far better than the things that we're doing, and even just the basic understanding of behavior through a different lens, I think, is so critical to that. So I hear you. This really is a journey, and I think my hope is that wherever someone might be, that they're curious, they're asking questions. That the analogy that you had there is an analogy I've used a number of times, which is again, if a kid can't read, it's not a matter of you're going to say, okay, well, I know you're not able to read, but I'm going to give you a cookie here and now read this. I mean, that's not the way that people learn to develop capacity and skills. So, it's really interesting to hear you talk about that. I'd like to dive in a little bit more into some of the nuts and bolts, but, before we get there, I think it really is interesting, to hear kind of your journey and how you got introduced to this, and the training that you've been to. So let's talk a little bit more about this. And I like that you also just said, this is not CPS, Child Protective Services. Now, of course, Dr. Greene is still involved in collaborative problem solving. His the version of the model that Lives in the Balance and Dr. Greene does. And of course, there was a origin story there that his work was at Mass General previously as well. So these programs out there that have some similarity to them. But if you could talk a little bit more about what this approach looks like. And I know you work with both families and and schools, but if you could just kind of walk us through an example with maybe something that you might typically run into when you're trying to support a parent.
I mean, I think you sort of said it in my introduction. I think the blurb, the bio said, from getting a child to sleep to parent-teen conflict and everything in between. And it really is everything in between. I work with parents of kids who are having difficulty keeping their kids at the table, kids who will get upset and throw the food off the table, just and kids with disabilities, without disability, like all over, all eight, really ages 3 and above. So sometimes people say, well, what's the most common thing? And it's so hard to say because there's we're really looking at specific situations that the child is having difficulty with. And so we're really like, it's not like, oh, my kid has challenging behaviors. We're really peeling back the layers to understand what is the expectation in those specific moments that the child is having difficulty meeting. So,
Mhm.
for example, a child who's asked to do their homework and kind of gets a little bit of an attitude, I don't want to do it, I don't want, and the parent often gets frustrated, right? That might seem simple. Well, not simple, but like, okay, they get dysregulated, you know, agitated when asked to do their homework. But really, it's more. You use the word curious. We want to be curious about, well, is it all homework? Is it English, math, social studies, and science? Oh, actually, the parent says no, it's actually just math. I noticed that when my child has math homework specifically, that they seem to get dysregulated then. Okay, so now we're a little more focused on what is difficult for the student. And then what about what's going on there, right? And so this is a conversation that a parent or any other caregiver could have with a child or teacher student, right? Hey, kiddo, it seems like you're having a tough time getting your math homework done. What's going on? And the kid might say, I don't care. I don't like math. I don't like it. Okay, I hear you. What part about it is it that you don't like? Well, it's all stupid. I'm not going to need it when I'm an adult. Okay, I hear you. You feel like the work that you're doing, the homework is stupid. Tell me more. Is there parts of it that's hard, or is it not hard at all? And it's just that you find it stupid? Well, maybe the kid says something like, well, I'm just not good at it. Like, I hate it. I'm not good at it. My teacher is a jerk anyway. And it kind of goes on from there. And then the parent's job is really to understand what is the core of what's difficult for the student about doing their math homework. Is it that it's difficult, or is it that it's, I don't like the class, or I don't like the teacher, whatever it is, that's what we're seeking to understand. We're seeking to understand what is hard for the child to meet that expectation of completing their math homework. And then it's the parent's job to share their perspective. I mentioned we're working on building skills. One of the skills that we're building is and working towards is building the ability to have some perspective taking, being able to hear someone else's perspective. And that's not easy for a lot of kids. It's not easy for a lot of people. And so it's important that the parent also shares what's important to them. Hey, kiddo, what's important to me is that you're able to do your homework so that you have the practice, so that when you get back to class, your teacher can see what you're still struggling with and what parts you're not struggling with. Maybe that's why the parent is asking the child to do their homework in the first place. And then the parent really just invites the child to brainstorm some ideas about how we can find a solution to them getting, dealing with whatever their concern was, that part of the math homework is hard, or I don't like the teacher, or I don't, I'd rather be outside with my friends at this time. I can hear all my friends outside. I want to be with them. So what do we do when your friends are outside and at the same time? It's important that you get your math work completed. What ideas do you have? And then the kid and the parent can work together to find a solution that actually works for everyone. So
Mhm.
sometimes people think that this is about, the child coming up with ideas and then the parent just having to be like, okay, you came up with an idea. Great. We'll do that. That's not what this is about. And it's also not about the parent just saying, like, this is how it's going to go down.
Right,
This
right.
is what you're coming home from school, you're having a snack, you're doing your homework, and then you can go out. Well, that order of events may not work for the child. That might not be the best case for them. And so that's why it's so important that we hear from the child, because we want to give them a voice. That's really, really important. So many times, not blaming teachers or parents, kids aren't asked what's going on.
Right,
Kids aren't
right,
asked
right.
what their thoughts are. And so when a kid is able to participate in coming up with an idea to this, and the parent, can say, like, I'm not going to make you do anything you don't want to do. I really am really just curious. I want to understand what's going on. What's tough for you? I've got your back. I'm here for you. And that's sort of like when I do the trainings with teachers, I get into the specifics of the collaborative problem solving and how we have this conversation. But I also just tell them a big thing is, and you mentioned it, is that shift in mindset of how we're looking at challenging behaviors and how we're looking at kids with challenging behaviors.
Yeah.
And so that's
Yeah.
sort of like the aura that I like to bring into the conversation of
Right.
just saying, like, the feeling behind all of this is I've got your
Mhm.
back
Right.
and I'm
Right.
here for you and we're going to get through this.
And we're going to work together
Yeah.
because more often than not, if you haven't adopted a mindset like this, very often as adults, we want to kind of impose our will on a child, right? So a child's having a hard time, meeting some expectation, and the adult will say, "You're going to do this, you're going to do that. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to take this away from you." It's all about control, and a lot changes when you shift into a collaborative model. When you begin to listen to each other, when you begin to work together, one of our core principles is around collaboration, because I think it's so critical that we shift away from doing things to people or even doing things for people to truly doing things with people. Because when you do things with people, you come up with solutions that really can be long-standing and durable solutions. When people feel invested, I mean, and this is true not just of kids but of adults, right? I find that a model like this can be really, really helpful with how you work with each other. In your workplace, you might find this really useful. Nobody likes to be told that this is how it's going to be. We all feel much better about it when we have a voice at the table, and even seeing things differently. I think, I'm a huge proponent of, this idea that when you kind of look at things differently, you see different things. And Dr. Stuart Shanker, who I think the world of, has the saying of, "See a child differently, you see a different child."
Hmm.
When we begin to, see people differently, it gives us an opportunity to respond differently as well. I mean, even in kind of the terminology, I think about, I think one of the important things to keep in mind is that, we can talk about something like challenging behavior, but the child's not necessarily trying to give you a hard time. They're not trying to be challenging. The behavior you might find it challenging, but really, I mean, some of this comes into, what you were talking about. It's a skill that they haven't developed. It's feeling
Hmm.
overwhelmed. It could be a lot of other things that might be going on, but you only find those things if you're curious, right? When you begin to assume, and we do that a lot as adults, we assume, you don't really get to what's going on beneath the surface. So I think all that's so critical. Now, of course, this model is kind of built off, and you've talked a bit about, I guess what we call Plan B.
Hmm.
Kind of this collaborative model where you begin by listening and hearing from the child's perspective, and you share your concerns, and then you begin to invite the child to share ideas, and you kind of work through that process. Plan B is, of course, one of the plans that it's talked about in this approach. Can you talk a little bit about kind of these other, there's Plan A and Plan C, what those are, and how those might come into play in this collaborative problem solving model?
Yeah. So with that homework example, let's say a plan A approach, which you could think of the letter A for the word adult, is when the adult imposes their will in the situation, often through their use of rewards, consequences, bribes, things like that.
You're going to lose your Xbox. You're going to not
Yep,
be able to go do
exactly.
whatever you're. Yep. Yep.
So with the homework, if I was the parent, I could say, hey, if you don't do your math homework now, you're not going to get on your Xbox later. No Xbox for you tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And if my only goal is to try and get my expectation met, then I can use a plan A. The thing is, with a plan A approach, typically the challenging behavior escalates. If you were threatened with something like getting your Xbox taken away, some kids, typically the kids with stronger skill areas, will be like, oh, okay, then let me get back to work. but they can only get back to work and do their work if they have the skills
Right.
to ignore distraction or wait for something they want or express their frustration with this specific topic or whatever. Otherwise, we're going to see an increase in challenging behavior. And oftentimes, a plan A approach creates some sort of rupture between the parent and the child. Yes, there are opportunities for repair, but we want to be mindful that a lot of rupture just really fractures that relationship. So we can go with a plan A approach. It is one of what we call our options. We just want to start to be mindful. We want to try to get proactive in thinking about, like, I know when I ask my child to do their math homework that there's going to be some pushback. So I want to think about which approach I want to go with, right? A is an option, but I don't want to deal with that escalation of behavior. I know that's going to happen. Let me see what else I can do. There's plan B is always an
Mhm,
option,
mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Plan
and of course with plan A, I mean, at the end of the day, if they don't have the skill, don't have the ability, don't have whatever it may be, we can will it all we want to be done, but that doesn't mean that we're going to get it done or get it done the way
exactly.
that maybe it needs to be done. And even as adults, I mean, would you rather have somebody working with you, or would you rather have somebody just telling you that this is the way it is?
Yeah,
And so plan A is always available as a choice, but often, very often, not the best choice.
right. And it's also not building any skills,
Right.
right? Our whole perspective is that challenging behavior is about skill,
Right.
not will. Like you said before, this is not about a child being difficult on purpose because they're
Mm.
trying to be bad. And yes, I know it often feels like they just know what to do to push my buttons. I hear that a lot. But really, they're doing the best that they can with the skills that they have in this current situation.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
And so, if our focus is really, I want to help that child build the skills, then plan A is not the option for that moment.
So plan A, I'm the adult, I'm in charge, you're gonna do it because I said so.
Yeah. And it
Plan
can
B.
sound nice too. Plan
Right.
A can sound like, hey, buddy, if you can just knock out this math homework, I'll give you additional Xbox time
Right. Right. Right.
as a
Right.
reward. It's still the math homework's not going to get done if the child is struggling with some core
Right.
skills
Right.
of flexibility and frustration tolerance and all of that.
Right. And of course, again, even when framed in a positive way, and again, often that involves the use of rewards. There's a whole lot of research around the downfall of rewards.
Right.
You begin to put a child in a situation where they're constantly dependent on a reward. It devalues the task. They lose interest. They feel controlled. All of these things can happen as a result of kind of that approach as well. So
Right.
you've got plan A, okay, kind of the adult imposed solution.
Mhm.
You've got plan B, kind of the collaborative approach, and working together, and then you have plan C. What's plan C?
So plan B is, you could think of the letter B for the word both,
Mm-hmm.
just to throw that in. Plan C, you can think of the letter C for the word child. I feel like pointing these A, B, C out in
Yep.
those
Yep.
words, adult, both, and child, is helpful just to remember it. So plan C is when we temporarily let go of our expectation. So for this math homework example, what I might say to my child is, hey, kiddo, it's time to do your math. And they say, I don't want to. And I say, okay, fine. You don't have to do your math homework tonight. Or I know that even by asking them to do their math homework, there's going to be an escalation. So I don't even ask. I pretend I don't know. That's not a long-term solution. It is a great temporary option if your focus is really, and your goal is really, to reduce any challenging behavior. You might have had a long day, your child might have had a long day, and you might say, I know things are going to escalate with this math homework, and maybe I'm not in a place to have a plan B, or my child is not in a place to have a plan B. So I'm just going to let it go for now. I can't every night say, okay, fine, you don't have to do your math homework. At some point soon, maybe that night at bedtime, maybe the next day over breakfast, at some point soon, we have to get to a place of having a plan B conversation with our child to find a solution to this, right? And In the meantime, we're making sure that there's no increase in challenging behavior. We're letting go of our expectation, and parents have a difficult time with that,
Mhm.
understandably, because it often feels like there they go again. They're getting their way. What am I teaching them? That they can just escalate and then they get what they want? That would happen if we did nothing about it and we kept going with a plan C. There's two differences here. One is that the hope is that this is a proactive solution, that before we are addressed with this math homework, that we're making a decision about how we're going to approach the situation, A, B, or C, because that puts the parent in control, not in control of the child, but in control of their approach. Because oftentimes we as parents are like fighting this battle. Do your homework. I don't want to do it. Do your homework. I don't want to do it. And then we're sort of, okay, fine, fine. And we feel like we're backed up into a corner and we
Mhm.
just give up. We don't want to be in that position. We
Mhm.
want to be in a position where we're really aware of why we're choosing what we're choosing. So that's part one, that the hope is this is a proactive decision, a conscious decision. The other part is we can't let it go forever, because then that's not a plan C. A plan C is almost like a C plus. It's a
Mhm.
C plus B, right? We can let it go for the moment. And at some point, when everyone is calm and regulated and we're sort of away from the heat of the moment, we're going to have a plan B with the child. And look, sometimes we can have that plan B in the heat of the moment. Hey, I notice you haven't gotten started on your math homework. What's going on? Bringing in that curiosity. But if there's
Mhm.
some dysregulation happening, we can back off for the moment. I feel like that also empowers parents to say, I see what my choices are, and I'm just so glad I have a choice. I
Mhm.
never
Mhm.
felt like I had a choice. I didn't know what else to do. Now we know what we can do. We know the pros and cons of each plan, and we can make an informed decision that works for both the child and for us.
Mm. One of the things that's interesting about Plan C is, in my experience, there are occasions where adults have expectations that maybe don't have to be expectations. So there's occasions where we're demanding something, want something to be done, and some of this I think requires a little bit of self reflection as well. Like as the adult, why am I so insistent that this is such a priority right now? And I think there's some things that might end up in a Plan C queue that aren't necessarily things that maybe have to come back later for Plan B, because maybe it's just something that as the adult I was stuck. I was
Right.
inflexible. I think it can be kind of interesting, going through this, because you begin to see things differently. And again, I mean, part of this is, you're seeing things through that lens of, okay, well, this isn't a kid giving me a hard time. This is a child having a hard time. Why is this difficult for them? And you're listening to them and hearing what they have to say, not only in understanding the problem, but coming up with a solution. We
Mhm.
had a comment here a minute ago, and I'm just going to bring this up, but Stacy said, kids are usually good at coming up with solutions, but often they're not asked. And sometimes those solutions will surprise you. And I guess one of the things I've run into, and I'm sure that you have as well, is we may not get it right the first time around. We may go through all the steps. We may go through that plan B and collaboratively problem solve, and we have a solution that we think will meet the child's needs and meet the adult needs. And maybe it doesn't work, but that doesn't mean we don't come back to the table and have another conversation and figure out why, what we can do differently. So I mean, it really can be somewhat of an iterative process too, right? I mean, things change, capacity changes both for the adult and the child. So there's so much at play here that, I mean, this is about really changing your mindset, I think, more than
Mhm.
anything else. And I know that I've heard both Dr. Ablon and Dr. Green kind of say the crux of this, like, kids do well if they can, right?
Mhm.
This is about, if a kid could do well, they would do well. This is about if they had the skill, the ability, the capacity in the moment, whatever it may be. Certainly for anyone, it's a much better position to be in, to be meeting somebody's expectations, doing the things you should be doing. A kid doesn't think, okay, well, I'm going to be really tough today. I mean, it's just not really what happens.
Right.
So, I mean,
And
I
that's
think,
hard. That's a really, I believe in the philosophy. I've been doing this for, I don't know, several years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. I don't know. Like you said, the years fly by. Um, but when your kid is escalating and really challenging, it is difficult. It is so difficult to be grounded in that belief and that philosophy that they're not doing this on purpose, because there are
right,
so many times it feels like they're doing this on purpose.
right, right.
And there have been times as a mom myself that I've needed more than a day to get back to that place of believing it. And I've learned just to kind of like stay quiet until I'm back to that regulated state. But I'm telling you, like, even though I believe this, when you're in that moment, it is very difficult to believe kids do well if they can.
Mm-hmm.
And once I'm back to feeling calm and using my thinking skills and all of that, I'm like, yes, she or he, they were doing the best that they can.
Right.
And the empathy that comes from that is what drives that conversation.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
ability to really just say,
Right.
we're going to get through this.
And required empathy at times towards yourself, because you are likely doing
Thank
the
you
best
for
that you
saying
can.
that.
Yeah, no, I think it's important though. I mean, I think it's important as the adults that, first of all, I mean, we know fairly well that a dysregulated adult is not going to help a kid who's dysregulated,
Right.
but we also know that we will become dysregulated. We are not perfect. And we've got to understand anything that we would apply to a child, we would apply to a teacher or a parent or anyone else. Now, of course, there's some differences here, and we can look at brain development. We can look at kind of where kids are in terms of, those kinds of things. But nonetheless, I mean, it's important to, I think, realize this is a process and understand your own part in it. DV says, what's worse is when the adult takes it personally. That's kind of what we were talking about, and it's easy to do. But you know what? If you do, forgive yourself, move on. And I think another component of this that I've heard talked about often is this idea that this is not always about dealing with things in the moment that things are going wrong. Some of this is about what some of these issues that you might run into as a parent or as an educator. These are predictable things. These are things that you already know that given this challenge, this child's going to have a difficult time. You've seen it happen time and time again. Rather than trying to problem solve with a kid who is dysregulated, there are opportunities to kind of be more proactive, talk about it, not in the heat of the moment, but kind of after the fact. So I think both for the child and the adult, sometimes that space and time can be really important as well. Obviously, there are some things that have to be dealt with at the moment. But,
Right.
In other cases, sometimes it's really best when you've got, you're both in a different mindset.
I wanted to just comment on DV's comment because I did see that pop through, and it's understandable that parents take things personally. We care about our kids. It hurts. It really hurts when we're yelled at or cursed at or disrespected in any way. And like you're saying, yes, it may sometimes be easier to have that empathy for the child. It's important to have that empathy for ourselves. Something I share with parents is called the 3 C's: calm, curiosity, and compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk to parents about the importance of bringing that to the table with their child, coming to them when they're calm, bringing in curiosity and a lot of compassion, and at the same time, doing that for ourselves. Being curious, like, why was that tough for me? Why did I take it personally? There's no right or wrong. I just did. But like, what was that about? Was it because I was stressed with work? Was it because I'm just tired? Was it because whatever? But bringing in that curiosity helps us understand what's going on beneath the surface for us, and that compassion for ourselves. We are
Mm-hmm.
definitely doing the best that we can. We didn't go to school for this. I mean, I did, and it's still hard. Like, it's still hard, and I have a background in all of this. But, it's just remembering that compassion piece.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you
Yeah,
for bringing
and
it up.
being aware that I mean, just the fact that we or our child can do something on one day doesn't mean that we have the same capacity another day. There's a lot of things that can lead to that kind of fluctuating capacity, both
Right.
for us and for children. So I mean, having those that knowledge, I think, can be really helpful. I want to encourage people that are watching live, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put those in the chat. If you just want to pop in and say hello and let us know where you're from, that's always fun too. So feel free to let us know who you are and where you're from as well. So I want to transition a little bit. Of course, this is an approach that you have, you have brought to families and caregivers, but you've also worked with schools and other settings as well. Let's talk a little bit about this in the context of a school. I think I mentioned to you that some of my early journey around this was actually trying to bring in the collaborative proactive solutions approach, a similar approach into a school system following issues related to excessive restraint and seclusion. There's some work to be done to get people to think about different solutions. But very often you've got teachers who, are understaffed and have lots of children in the room, and are having children that are having some behaviors that can be very challenging for them. So tell me kind of what your work with schools has looked like, how you brought a model like this into schools to help, because I do think a large part of this is changing the adult mindset.
Mhm.
And when the adult mindset changes, it's amazing what else can follow. So how have you been successful, and what does this look like if you work with educators?
So typically it's a full training, anywhere from like, an hour and a half, a 2-hour introduction, which is really just an overview of CPS, to a full 12-hour, typically multi-day training where they learn the approach, all the ins and outs, how to use this, and doing some role playing and understanding that, and of course learning the philosophy and the science. But it's for all staff in a school. This is not just about the teachers. It's also about, the people who are working in the cafeteria, any administrators, any child study team members, any really everyone who interacts with a student. It's really helpful when they understand this approach because, like you said, it's a cultural shift.
Right.
It's everyone kind of moving about the day with this perspective and this mindset that kids do well if they can.
Yeah, and that can be a difficult thing to change, and I know from working with lots of folks who have worked with schools, that when you come in with a program like this, I'm sure there are people like, oh, what is it now? What are they going to show us now? You've got some people that these things kind of begin to resonate with quickly. Others that are not interested in probably anything you have to offer, and a
Right.
lot of people that are in the middle. So that kind of change is something that can be a challenge to bring about. But how do you help people to kind of understand what the benefits? I mean, I happen to be a big believer that approaches like this, and there's others that I think are fantastic as well. But approaches like this really do, at the end of the day, offer a lot of benefit to everyone involved. This is not just about let's do something better for kids because it's better for kids. At the end of the day, bringing these kinds of solutions in, while again it may involve some learning and some work up front, as you begin to work through these challenges that a child might be having, you're going to make progress that not only helps them to progress, but ultimately means that you're spending less time perhaps managing things that you were managing before. So, talk to me a little bit about how perhaps, and I'm going to use the word sell, but and maybe it's not the right word, but how you kind of convince educators that these things can be really beneficial to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right. Teachers don't get a whole lot of extra time. One of the biggest challenges I feel for me is trying to find PD, professional development hours to do this training, on top of all the other things that teachers have to learn about curriculum. Some of their concerns are, I'm in the classroom by myself with 22 students. I've got a couple kids with challenging behaviors. I don't have time for this understandable. And so one of the things, and I understand. I I was a teacher for a very short period of time, but it has not been in many, many years, and I'm not an expert in their classroom. But typically, one of the things that I like to share, a couple of things, is my hope is you have a team, right? So it's not just you as the classroom teacher who can use plan B with the student. It could be the school counselor. It could
Mhm.
be another teacher, a specials teacher, the art teacher. We're looking for someone maybe who has a good relationship with the student. So don't feel like you have to always be the one to address it. Also, letting the teachers know you have the option to let it go. Again, plan C, that creates additional problems, right? Well, if I let this kid stay on their computer and everyone else, I need them to get back on task, what does that say? Other kids are going to want to get on their computer. The truth is that, yes, that may be true. Typically, there's one or two students who exhibit these kinds of challenging behavior, and maybe in a class of 22, the other 19 or 20 are pretty much going to do what's expected because they have the skills to do what's expected. And so they may ask, "Oh, why is that student able to stay on their computer?" And you can give whatever response feels appropriate. "Oh, we're working on a different plan," or I'm working with that student. I want you to just get back and focus on what you're doing or whatever. Typically, things won't escalate. They won't snowball for that group of
Mhm.
19, 20 students. Um, the other thing is when things escalate, that takes time, right? If you have a student who you say, "Okay, everyone, do your do now." Do now is when you walk into a classroom and there's a sort of like assignment on the board. It might be like, write what you did for the weekend, for example. Do your do now. And you see one kid opening up his computer and they're not doing their do now, and it's a written assignment. If you say, "Okay, buddy, it's time for you to close your computer and do your do now," and the student doesn't, there's going to be a back and forth. That's going to take several minutes and could escalate. And it could escalate to the point that the student is then asked to leave the room if they're not going to comply. That takes several minutes and a whole lot of disruption. Using a plan B approach with that student could look a lot different, right? You can go with plan C, you can go with plan A and threaten the kid, if you don't do your do now, I'm going to send you to the principal's office. Um, but right then and there, you could say, "Hey, it seems like you're having a tough time getting started on the do now.
Mhm.
What's going on?" And like you said, kids will surprise you with their solutions, but they'll also surprise you, or could surprise you, with what they say about why they're not accomplishing that task.
Right. Right.
But diving into a plan B conversation could take as long as the back and forth power struggle, or even less than the power struggle and the benefits of plan B, right? The child doesn't escalate. And how embarrassing is that? That's the worst for a kid to be like, "Well, here I get picked on again, and I'm getting kicked out of the classroom again," and on that
Mhm. Mhm.
hamster wheel. This is a way to get off of that, shift things. And yes, it will take some time, and it might not work the first time. Or I don't want to say it might not work, because there is no failed plan B.
Mhm.
Every
Mhm.
approach, every time we approach a student with that compassion and curiosity, even if the solution doesn't work or the challenging behavior doesn't change, doesn't mean that like this thing doesn't work. Just means we got to go back and, tweak some things and approach it differently, or, maybe have the conversation somewhere else or whatever. But my hope is that educators know that I have compassion for them. Like, I know
Mhm.
this is hard work. It really is hard work, and, not everyone does it because it is hard, and people leave their profession because it's difficult. Um, at the same time, if we're there, I want teachers to know I always wanna hear from them what they see as difficult, because I wanna see how we can make CP. I'm not trying to force or convince people to use collaborative problem solving, what I do want to do is make sure I hear what are the roadblocks to it so that I can see how CPS could work for them. And it may take time, and maybe they only kind of absorb some of the information, but really it's trying to be open-minded to all of this and trying to try something new.
Yeah. And again, shifting mindsets sometimes can change so much. I think there are a lot of benefits to this kind of approach. For example, I think one of the benefits when you begin to do this, when you begin to collaborate with kids and kids are able to kind of feel seen and heard and valued, you strengthen relationships. And of course, that comes with a whole host of benefits as well. You strengthen a relationship. You help a kid feel safe and welcome. You help a kid feel, all of this can lead to, less, kind of distress related behavior or kids having a hard time. What other benefits do you see that, and you could be inclusive here of educators or families, but anyone that might be doing an approach like this, what other kinds of benefits do you see that they get from going through this process?
So I would say one of the benefits is like building that intrinsic motivation. So earlier when we were talking a little bit about rewards, you were saying, the focus ends up being on the reward, which means that the reward is an extrinsic motivator, which is fine. We all have those in our lives. What we want to be mindful of is, are we building that child's intrinsic motivation? And I always tell parents ask about that. And I say, a car drives intrinsic motivation. And what I mean by car is the letter CAR: competency, autonomy, and relatedness. Those three things are what helps drive that feeling like I'm good at something. I can do this on my own, right? And that relatedness, like I feel connected here, like someone's listening to me. Plan B is all about that, which is like just amazing that when we ask kids to share their story, to hear where they're coming from, where we're being empathetic and trying to really dig deep to understand them, and then we ask them what ideas they have. Tell me about competency. Like, I have ideas, and now this adult might even we might use this idea that I have. Kids don't get asked that often. I think someone said that in the notes, right?
Yep.
So I think building that intrinsic motivation is I guess you would call it a bonus to using this collaborative problem solving. In addition to that, and I didn't mention this in the beginning, is that collaborative problem solving is a trauma-informed approach. And so every time there's a punitive, it's this cycle that we're in. Every time there's challenging behavior, what comes next? Often some punitive response. And any sort of punitive discipline sort of, I don't want to say arrests, but it affects the building of skills. And if the building of skills is affected in a negative way, like it's not able to build, I know I'm not getting my word out right. What do we see? We often see challenging behavior.
Right.
When we see challenging behavior, there's this punitive discipline. And so it's a cycle.
Right.
Collaborative problem solving kind of disrupts that cycle where we say, okay, I see this challenging behavior, but now I'm going to go with this relational approach. Well, what does that do? That actually collaborative problem solving helps to build skills. And so once the skills are being built, we're not going to see as much challenging behavior. And so we are now able to create a new cycle. And so whether it's someone who, experienced, I know you can't really classify it, but like this much trauma or this much trauma, we're changing the cycle of how things typically go.
Yeah, and a kid that is collaborating to solve problems sees themselves differently than a kid who is always in trouble. Right. A kid who is always in trouble begins to see themselves as
A kid who's
always
weird.
being
Yeah.
right, right.
That
And
kid.
that I mean, that perception, their own perception of themselves,
Right.
then has an impact on their future behavior. And of course, kind of thinking about that trauma piece of it. I mean, we know, I mean, kids that experience a lot of trauma, we know that trauma can change a brain. Trauma can lead to hypervigilance. Hypervigilance can lead to stress. Stress
Right.
can lead to behavior, but each time you pile another punitive exclusionary consequence on top of that, you're further traumatizing, further pushing kids down the same cycle of really negative change. I mean, it really can be that hamster wheel that you're talking about here.
Mhm. Mhm. And I'm glad you mentioned that the child's own perception,
Hmm.
because a kid who's getting in trouble a lot, that's what they're facing all the time.
Right, right.
Some typically adult, like this power struggle, this battle, we have all these like kind of like violent words to talk about it, this tug of war,
Mhm,
violent,
mhm, mhm.
and to have an adult come at you with that level of compassion just feels like it's just so therapeutic,
Mhm.
I actually don't do therapy in my coaching. It very much is coaching, and I'm not doing therapy, but all of this is therapeutic.
Mhm,
It
mhm, mhm.
really is just helping build those relationships and, changing how, like, I love how you said it, changing the perception that the child has of themselves.
Right, right. Yeah, and I love that you brought up kind of the autonomy as well. Unfortunately, I think in many cases, the mindset in families and in education sometimes is a little, well, far too much for my taste. Really focused on compliance. And when we're focused on compliance, when we're focused on making people do things, and we do that a lot with kids. We don't give kids the kind of autonomy I think that kids need sometimes. And Stacy had a comment kind of similar to this as well that I'll get to in a second. But I think that sometimes that focus on compliance really leads us down that road where we're setting up for behaviors. When kids don't have that autonomy, don't have that, have that support, we're going to see very different,
Oh,
different
yeah.
responses. So, I mean, I think the benefits again of an approach like this are far deeper than they seem to be on face value. I mean, not only are you, kind of solving problems, but in the long term, you're helping to reshape how you see that child, how that child sees themselves, and all of that has an influence on what we're going to see down the road. So, I mean, I think it's really important. Stacy had a comment, and this was kind of from a discussion we were having. But parents get so caught up in the rigor of what society demands. It's about expectations, right?
Mhm.
Everyone else's expectations, and we need a cultural shift in this country. I would say that also when it comes to, um, the way we think about children. Sometimes I think we're stuck too much in that compliance mindset that does not give kids autonomy, choice, participation, and all of that. Of course, leads to yeah. We're not even letting children be children, right? Exactly. Yep. Good point. Good point. Yeah. So this is really interesting, and I just want to have you as we're getting towards the end of our time here. Um, you've been training this for a while, and both for parents and caregivers and working with schools. Um, can you share with us? And you don't have to get specific; it can be kind of general. But I'd love to hear some success stories, some things that you found, where the people have been surprised, like maybe you've even been surprised by how this has worked. And I think about at one point we. After I discovered some of these approaches, we're using similar approaches with my own family, and I remember some of the solutions that we found. Like my son wanted pizza for breakfast, and somehow pizza for breakfast solved this other problem that we had. There were things that happened along the way. So, any success stories or anything you'd like to share, kind of about the work that you've done and some of the things that you've seen just
Yeah.
really transform.
I just did a training at a school, and I hadn't completed the training, but, I think we did it over the course of 4 days. And so, the teachers were learning piece by piece, and they were practicing based on, even after day 1, just practicing what I had shared. And the behaviorist in the school had shared that there was a student who would often leave class and was, got in trouble and had to go to the vice principal and was told about their consequence. I don't even remember what the consequence was, but left and started punching the lockers. And the behaviorist, in this, having gone through not all of the training, started using some of the strategies or approach, as far as like, okay, my focus is really just to de-escalate this child. How can I first de-escalate before we get to the problem solving, before I ask too many questions, to be curious? Like, when you're in that heated kind of situation, how do I de-escalate things? And the behaviorist, lowered his body, quieted down, asked a couple questions, and kind of could see that the student was de-escalating, to the point that finally the student was receptive to going to the behaviorist's office to talk about all that happened. Right? What kind of, I know what it was. There was a fight out at recess, and that physical altercation was what led the student to the VP's office, which led to the VP saying, "Here's your consequence for that," and the student, getting so dysregulated. But to me, that was super successful, and the behaviorist felt good about it. The punching of the locker didn't continue. The student, I'm guessing, felt really good. Based on what the behaviorist told me, the student seemed to receive the plan B approach, I guess you could call it, just that curiosity of questions and, a lot of reassurance and reflective listening. It just changed the dynamic of what could have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really happy to hear that this educator, who didn't even complete the training yet, even just a portion of the way through the training, was able to make such a significant change with the student.
Mm-hmm.
And the outcome for both, for the student and, the greater school, because that's very disruptive to hear a student, punching a locker in the middle of the hallway for other students. So it really was able to shift how it could have gone.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fantastic. So you, as we talked about before, you offer training both to families, caregivers, to schools. Where can people learn more about you and the training that you offer?
My website is mariasandersparentcoach.com.
Okay.
So it's kind of easy. I post on Instagram occasionally. My Instagram is instagram.com/mariasandersparentcoach. I can be found on LinkedIn. And I work with parents, like you had mentioned early, virtually, or in my office in New Jersey. And so what that means is I can work with parents who are not in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
In every state, you mentioned you have people in other countries. I have worked with people in other countries as well. I'm bilingual, so I also offer support to parents who speak Spanish. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I remember we were talking at one point. You were doing or offering some courses in Spanish as well. Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
That's
so we have
fantastic.
I offer some parent classes as well.
Yeah, and as I recall, and my memory is not always as good as it should be, but I believe that they were working on new materials in Spanish. Did that happen? Have you been able to get the new updated materials in Spanish as well?
I have updated them to
Okay.
the best of my ability.
Gotcha.
But they have not been fully updated yet. There's still some pieces that are not yet translated, and I can't wait for that to happen.
Yeah, fantastic. So I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your experience and telling us about the work that you do. Certainly, I think that this is the kind of approach that can be really helpful to parents and to educators. And when we look at the work that we're doing, that's about kind of reducing and eliminating punitive exclusionary discipline, this is the answer to what you can do instead. Instead of doing, restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, how do we move in a direction where we're proactively working with kids and helping to solve problems and really coming up with durable solutions that ultimately are going to help a kid, increase their capacity over time as well. So this has really been great. Any final thoughts or final words you want to leave us with as we wrap up today?
A couple like philosophy ideas to hold, in your
Mm,
mind, something that rhymes. And I'm not suggesting that all parents get furious. I know we get frustrated and
mm.
there's a level of what that might look like, but be curious, not furious. Our kids are doing the best that they can with the skills that they have in this current situation. And even though I know it feels like they're pushing our buttons and doing all of this on purpose, there's other things going on. And so when we can lean in on that curiosity, whether it's for ourselves, like, I wonder why they're behaving this way or not meeting this expectation, or out loud to them, we want to really lean in on that curiosity and try to keep that, philosophy of kids do well if they can at your mindset.
Yeah, love it. I was a fan of the show Ted Lasso, and there was a quote in there. It apparently was a misquote, but it was "Be curious, not judgmental," and that kind of idea of like
Yep.
being curious and taking a step back and not trying to assume that somebody's upset at you or mad at you
Right.
or giving you a hard time really does a lot. So anyway, I want to thank you for joining us here today. I'm going to ask you to hang around for a second. We're going to let
Sure.
everybody else go. But thank everybody for joining us today for this show. And I encourage you to share it with others and join us again. We'll have another show coming up real soon. And from there, take care and we'll see you again next time.